know Nellie has driven up to Skyline.
Too well. Oh, he needs the password to get.
That, that too.
Chris just needs help setting up.
I downloaded the thing, but there's a few.
Yeah, that makes.
All right, we're going to go ahead and start our meeting this evening. Today is Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, and it feels good to be back in the boardroom. And welcome to everyone who's here in attendance. Our very first item of business is an exciting one. Gayleen Gandy, who represented Precinct 7, has resigned, and the board on July 14th appointed Chris Nguyen to take her place, representing our most western part, a lot of West Valley and a most of Magna. And so we thank Sherry Swenson for being here this evening to swear our new board member in. We'll go ahead and proceed with that. All right, we are sure excited to have Chris join us on our team. We held interviews in July, and she's clearly the winner. Once she makes it back to the microphone, we're going to have her take a minute and introduce her supporters. Thanks again, Sherry, for being here this evening. Chris, if you want to take an opportunity to recognize your friends and family who are here to support you this evening.
Okay. So tell me how this works. Push the. Nope. I'm pretty loud anyway. So my parents are here, Lamar and Annabeth Meekum.
Go ahead and stand.
Up. Yeah. And they're part of my precinct also, which is awesome. And then I have my husband and my daughter, Paige, and my granddaughter. He's my granddaughter. And she has a game in just a few minutes, so they're going to be leaving quickly. And then my son, Alec, and his wife, Hannah, and soon to be granddaughter number 2, so in October. And then my sisters, Carrie and Carolee, they're here today. And then my sister also, Anitra Kohler.
Nice. Welcome, Anitra. All right, I failed to begin with introductions, but now that Chris is sworn in officially, we'll go ahead and start with who's here, starting with Connie Anderson.
Connie Anderson.
Nicole McDermott.
Connie Burgess.
Chris Wynn.
Gary Bodden. Todd Zinger.
Martin Bates, Superintendent.
Karen Winder, Board President. We also have members of our superintendency and Dave Garrett with us this evening as well. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and proceed with our agenda, which next up is a PBL update, Proficiency-Based Learning update by Dawn Hauser. Welcome, Dawn.
Dawn, is that you under that mask?
Not quite the same without my.
Yes. That's right. You're never fully dressed.
I knew that was coming.
Thank you.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much for having me. This, I think Ben's going to pull the I emailed last week.
Dawn, do you want to pull down your mic just a little bit? Thanks.
How's that? I'll weave it underneath my face shield. Is that better? Okay.
Fortunately, our teachers all have those deals that
Yes.
hang right here. That's
Yes.
hard with
So
the
this is going to kind of act as my yoke. How's that? So again, thank you for having me this evening. I'm very excited to be able to talk to you briefly tonight about the PBL updates and changes for the upcoming school year and beyond. We'll begin this evening by viewing the short video that was sent out to you in the materials for today's meeting. This is the very same video that will be shown to all teachers in all Granite School District schools on Tuesday, August 17th. All PBL teachers and those that are coming on board to PBL and were trained this school year have all been notified of the changes in June as soon as our superintendency made a decision on those recommendations that came from our focus groups. I would like to thank Stephen Powell and Ben Horsley's office in the communications department for helping engineer this video.
Let's quickly review where we've been, then move on to where we're headed with proficiency-based learning in Granite School District. Granite has been researching, beta testing, and implementing proficiency-based learning, or PBL, since 2011.
We roll that back so we can start at the beginning.
Let's quickly review where we've been, then move on to where we're headed with proficiency-based learning in Granite School District. Granite has been researching, beta testing, and implementing proficiency-based learning, or PBL, since 2011. Currently, 93% of elementary teachers and 53% of secondary teachers are practicing PBL in their classrooms. Through the whole implementation process, we've worked to ensure that practices and structures are responsive to student, parent, and teacher needs. In March of 2020, in partnership with the Granite Education Association, Granite District surveyed all PBL Gradebook users to provide insights on strengths and areas of needed improvement on our current PBL system. Responses from the survey were reviewed by focus groups made up of practicing PBL teachers and content area specialists, who then developed recommendations to address areas of concern. These recommendations were then given to a larger committee comprised of GEA reps, PTSA members, parents, professional association members, district community council members, the Board of Education, and administrators from every school network. These groups worked on solutions to address the overarching theme of teacher time spent on planning and grading. To address this, 4 specific areas of concern were identified: tools and materials, decaying average, number of assessments, and PBL implementation challenges. Each recommendation was carefully considered through the lens of Granite's PBL philosophy and guiding principles, and, with a few exceptions, all recommendations were accepted for immediate implementation and are as follows. Beginning the 2020-2021 school year, teachers will have the flexibility to determine the appropriate number of assessments for each standard. There will no longer be a requirement to assess a standard 3 times. A proficiency score for a standard will be populated and calculated into the overall grade once an assessment score is entered. Standards will no longer carry over into other quarters, a common problem with the 3 assessment requirement. It is recommended that key standards, which are noted on district curriculum maps with a key symbol, should be assessed multiple times. Please note this is a recommendation only, and PLCs will have the flexibility to determine the number of assessments for every standard. The shift to a minimum of one assessment means the decaying average is also eliminated as a calculation for determining proficiency, which brings us to our second big change. Beginning the 2020-2021 school year, proficiency will be determined by the most recent assessment score. This method of calculation is referred to as recency and places the greatest value on the most recent evidence of learning. This gives students the opportunity to grow in their understanding of a standard through formative experiences, such as learning tasks, activities, formative assessments, and checks for understanding, and receive feedback on those experiences in preparation for a summative assessment. The score on the most recent summative assessment will determine the proficiency score for a specific standard and calculate into the final grade for the course. These changes mean the gradebook will no longer require a predetermined number of assessments to generate a proficiency score. Instead, a proficiency score will populate as soon as a teacher enters an assessment score, and the overall grade will calculate. Students and parents will now have a more accurate view of strengths and weaknesses at that moment in time, and quickly identify whether a student needs to complete additional learning and retake an assessment. In a situation where a teacher decides to give more than one assessment, but a student is content with their score on the first assessment, the student must still complete the most recent assessment, or they will receive a 0. Remember, the last assessment score populates the proficiency score for a standard. That being said, in circumstances where teachers are confident that early assessment scores are sufficient evidence of student proficiency, teachers may use professional judgment to override zeros on subsequent assessments. In the case of a student refusing to take early assessments and choosing to only take the last or most recent assessment, teachers will need to make judgments based on formal and informal data they've collected about their students and their progress. There may be times when a teacher determines other pre-planned assessments are not needed for specific students based on previous learning tasks, formative assessments, activities, and discussions. Students should always be fully engaged in their learning, and teachers must communicate with parents regarding specific student concerns. The increase in flexibility on the number of assessments and the shift to recency means teachers need to be confident in their ability to adequately assess proficiency. District leadership has made it a priority to have proficiency scales, sample assessments, and accompanying rubrics available in a specialized digital library of PBL resources by the end of the 2020-2021 school year. Many of these resources are already available and will be moved to the new online library site. Plus, assessment training will be provided through the curriculum and student assessment departments. Teachers also need to ensure their summative assessments, those counting towards students' proficiency score on a standard, are the most comprehensive, robust assessments they administer. These assessments should show student learning through multiple modalities, even with the same assessment. The curriculum department will rewrite standards that appear in Gradebook with simplified language during the upcoming school year in preparation for rollout in the 2021-2022 school year. At the same time, the district will continue to work with Instructure to explore compatibility between Canvas and Gradebook to solve the problem of Canvas computing proficiency scores based on number of items correct rather than correlating specific items to specific levels of proficiency, an issue that Instructure is aware of. Additional training will be provided on the topics of formative and summative assessments, the use of school city, and implementing PBL with special populations, including multilingual learners, formerly referred to as English language learners, and special education and 504 students. Each school will adopt procedures for reassessment, including implementing deadlines and requiring students to complete learning activities and/or additional practices before reassessing. The Student Bill of Rights and Responsibilities will be the template for these school-level discussions. Principals and their leadership teams should clearly define procedures and assurances that guarantee students' rights and advocate student responsibilities. As a final note, some of the recommendations for PBL changes have been tagged for continued monitoring for potential future changes. These recommendations, including grade overrides and redesigning report cards, will continue to be considered after we get a clear sense of the impact the previously described changes have on our overall practice in the 2020-2021 school year, and any changes we make to our current student information system.
So there you have it. That's the video that all of our teachers will be seeing on August 17th. Principals will be practicing how to facilitate the discussion and the viewing of this video tomorrow at their administrator kickoff at Cottonwood High School. So I'll be taking them through that process. I would like to say that overwhelmingly, I've received very positive feedback about these changes from teachers, administrators, from Granite Education Association. And I'd like to thank our superintendency for their willingness to be very responsive to our teachers' feedback and the feedback from all of our stakeholder groups. Nicole represented the board on the District Survey Response Committee, and I think she would agree that everyone's voices were heard and taken into consideration. And that's evidenced by the grid you received. That's on the next slide. There's a copy of that on the next slide, that breaks down each of the recommendations that were submitted to the superintendency by the teacher focus groups with the, oh, usually Ben Horsley waiting on me. I'm never waiting on Ben Horsley. There you go. So on this grid, if you take a look at that, you'll see a summary of the feedback we received from the different stakeholder groups as well. There's also a percentage there that represents the percentage of PBL teachers who were surveyed after the recommendations were made by the focus groups. We sent another survey out to them asking them about their support, how strongly they supported those recommendations. And so all of those factors were taken into account when our superintendency made the decision about which of the recommendations should be implemented and which should be implemented immediately, which should be maybe placed as the video suggested on hold, so we can see how the two biggest changes that are coming about impact our practice this upcoming school year. So on this grid, you'll see the decisions and timelines for the recommendations. Please note that there were only 2 recommendations that our superintendency did not consider for implementation at this time. Both were on the topic of learning activities, and there was very low support for both of those from our PBL teachers. Those recommendations that were highlighted in green on your grid are recommendations that were accepted and assigned to specific departments here in the district for implementation. Those highlighted in yellow are those I mentioned as being tagged for ongoing monitoring this upcoming school year for later discussion at the end of next school year. The 2 that are not highlighted, that are just white, are the 2 that are not considered for implementation. And again, those are both on the topic of learning activities in the actual gradebook. Okay, so there are 3 pages, and this is a nice summary. And if you have any questions about the input that was given from the different stakeholder groups, this is a great resource for you and a great place for you to look for that. I created this for you, and Ben, would you mind passing those out? So this grid and handout that Ben's going to give to you wasn't in your packet, and I apologize for that. I just had an epiphany over the weekend that this might be helpful to give you a quick at-a-glance view of the major changes that were outlined in the video and their timeline. Please note that the most significant changes are already in place for the upcoming school year. We've already started trainings and coaching and communicating the message out to our teachers on these changes. And we'll discuss those 2 biggest changes here in the upcoming slides. But on this grid, you'll see that those that are tagged with a green effective immediately, these changes are already in place for the 2020-2021 school year. Those in yellow they require further discussion after and revisiting at the end of this upcoming school year to see what impact our 2 big changes have. And then those in blue will be worked on during the 2020-2021 school year because of our COVID, darn COVID, and our distance learning focus. We've had to shift just a couple of them, our priority on a couple of them, and that one is refers to the change of rephrasing the standards in more student and parent-friendly language. So that's something that is still a priority, but we're just pushing that back 1 year. Okay. And then, yes, and that's it. So let's discuss the two biggest changes, ones everyone's most excited about. These are number of assessments. And basically the theme here is that we have returned the flexibility to our teachers to use their professional judgment to determine the number of assessments required on a standard. So that is very good news, especially in these stressful times. Our teachers have been given that professional judgment to decide for themselves and with their PLCs what is the most appropriate number of assessments on a standard. Key standards will still continue to be noted on district curriculum maps, but PLCs will get to determine how many times key standards should be assessed. Dr. Bates?
What makes a key standard a key standard?
What makes a key standard a key standard? Our curriculum specialists in consultation with practicing teachers in those specific subject areas, they take a look at what's often referred to as the blueprint of the core curriculum, the Utah State Board of Education core curriculum, and that blueprint will often indicate which standards should be emphasized more or taught more frequently or are going to definitely be assessed. They're of that great of an import. And so our curriculum specialists will tag those and let our teachers know that those are key standards that they need to pay careful attention to. Really make sure that our kiddos have the background and the skills they need on those standards so that they can be successful. Did that answer your question, Dr. Bates? Okay. Again, this is great for our parents and for our students. Proficiency scores on a standard now that we don't have a minimum requirement of 3 assessments will automatically generate when the first assessment score is entered. So we'll no longer have those lags and those frustrations of of our parents and our students not knowing what their proficiency score on a standard was and how that was going to impact their overall grade until in some cases it was too late for them to maybe make some corrections that they wanted to correct. So this will be much more timely and fit with our philosophy that the purpose of a grade is to give parents and students a really good idea of where a student is performing in relation to specific standards at a specific moment in time during that grading period. Okay. The other significant change is move from recency, no more decaying average. We're now using recency as the calculation method in our PBL gradebook. So what this means is that the most recent evidence of student learning determines the proficiency score on a standard and calculates into the overall grade. And this favors our students by not penalizing them for those early learning attempts. I liken it to when I was at Granite High School. Go Farmers. And I was working on getting my driver's license in my driver's ed class. Now, if I had been graded on every slow start, including the time I ran one of the cars, the district automobiles, into a snowmobile, or a snowplow, excuse me, I probably wouldn't be able to drive today, right? So recency gives us, our students, the opportunity to learn, to grow, to get feedback from their teachers, and then to not be penalized for that growing and learning process. Okay. All assessments and scores, however, will still continue to show up in Gradebook, so parents will still be able to see anytime an assessment is entered into Gradebook, that assessment and that score will still appear. So as in the video example, if you had a student who refused to take an early assessment, a parent would see that. They would see that showed up as a 0. And so would the teacher, and so the teacher could intervene and work with that student and those parents. Okay. Yes, Nicole.
So
thanks for all your work on this. I know this has been a lot of work. I I did have somebody bring up this particular part of this, and with concern that this might be throwing in this part of it and having teachers understand this along with everything else that we're expected to do this fall. Have you heard, as you've rolled this out, what has been the response from, say, GEA or teachers as you've talked to them? Is this a concern that, are they confused by this? Is this, how are they gonna, do they feel like they can handle this? Because I've had some concerns brought up.
I have had, again, nothing but positive feedback. I have had a few teachers reach out to me with questions particular to their content area. I've had a couple of CTE teachers, some AP teachers, and together with their content specialists, we've worked through some of the nuances of those concerns. But overall, very, very excited for this because it simplifies the process for our teachers and for our students. And so it's been overwhelmingly positive, and the principals have been very, very positive about it as well. So I'm sure there are a few people who may be nervous about change on top of everything else, but it is very positive. And again, we're responding to what our teachers themselves requested. So I think that's important to remember.
Connie, really quick, along with that, sorry, let me just get this out. I know we talked about this when we did the meeting. Can teachers, because we said, what about if a student, teachers and students are frustrated and parents are frustrated when they get a 4 on the first assessment and then they get a 2 on the last one. So can teachers, do they have that flexibility of not putting it in for a student?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That professional judgment piece is crucial to recency. As a matter of fact, this is an interesting side note. Dr. Thomas Gusky, who's the national expert on proficiency-based learning, he chimed in with this focus group, and he explained to them that the most effective calculation method is mode, which means the frequency of a score, how often it appears, plus recency, plus professional judgment, which is exactly what our superintendency is advocated for.
I want you to know that we sixth grade parents went over that this spring.
Okay.
So yes, so
I
professional
just wanted
judgment.
to mention that the concern I have heard from teachers is rolling out something new on top of COVID and having to teach online and in class. And that was the concern that was expressed to me. Not that this wasn't wonderful, which it is, Dawn. It is wonderful. But there just was a concern about putting too much on teachers' plates. So I just would ask that we're sensitive
Absolutely,
to
Connie.
teachers as they try and do this, that it doesn't get to be an overwhelming thing.
Absolutely. And Connie, just so that we're all aware, the PBL gradebook will really, I think there's a lot of probably concern that that's going to be something that they have to learn, that's going to be new, and it really will not look any different for them. It will be the same as it always has been. It will just, the calculation will be different. So they won't see that on the back end. I mean, they'll notice it when they're looking at their students' scores, and parents will certainly notice it, as will students, but it won't require any additional training for them or any adjustment for them whatsoever.
I know one of the complaints I heard previously was the font was so small you couldn't read it. Has that been taken care of? Or it will still be teensy tiny little teeny writing?
On Gradebook?
Yeah.
I do think that they've done a tremendous amount of work this summer on Gradebook, trying to be responsive. Dale Roberts set in with that focus group and listened to all the concerns. So he's well aware of that. And I meet regularly with them, Connie. So absolutely, I can take that concern back to them.
Thank you.
Connie.
Yeah, I had the same. I had the same question as Nicole, but I would like to go back where it says that standards will no longer carry over. So does that mean if they didn't learn it in one quarter, they can't go back and learn it the second quarter? Tell me about that.
So under decaying average, if a teacher didn't administer 3 assessments on a standard, that standard would carry over into the next quarter and would show up on the grade book. So it really represented learning from a previous quarter instead of the the learning that was fully taking place within that quarter. And that was a concern that parents had. It was confusing, it confused students, and it was a concern that teachers had because if it would just continue to show up quarter after quarter unless they administered a third assessment. So now we won't have that problem, but teachers can still select to reteach a standard multiple times throughout the school year.
So,
Mhm.
so in other words, they can help that one student
Absolutely.
that didn't get the standard, and they can pass it even though it was the first quarter throughout the year.
If they feel like what's most likely to happen, Connie, is in a course like math or English language arts in particular, where you see
Right.
standards that are recursive, they reoccur again and again, you'll see a teacher select that standard and assess that standard again in other quarters, in multiple quarters.
Okay.
And so instead of having to worry about scores from a previous quarter carrying over, they can basically start fresh during a new grading period. Okay. Did that answer your question, Connie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once I think about it, I may have something else, but
You reach out
Along
to me.
with that though, does that mean, I mean, if they're not happy that they didn't pass that standard the first quarter and they do pass it the second quarter, will teachers still go back and change that grade the first quarter? So that
We're
proficiency-
not advising teachers to go back and change the grade or the score for that first quarter, only because again our district philosophy is that the grade represents learning in that moment of time. So it would certainly show that they had progressed. It would certainly show that they had grown on that standard, but we wouldn't necessarily recommend to teachers to go back and change the grade.
Are we
Now-
going to have parents that are upset about that because it's with GPA?
There,
That's a
now we
concern.
always have the opportunity, remember, for our students to reassess at any time, reassess during the quarter.
Right.
And what these new changes do is they actually simplify that and make it easier for our students because they only need to focus on retaking or reassessing that last assessment. So it gives them much more opportunity to earn 3s and especially 4s. And so I think that simplifies the process and gives students much more opportunity to achieve at high levels.
I think we need to be prepared though for maybe some clarification, because we've been saying, oh yeah, you can go back to first quarter, you can retake the assessment, and then the grade can be changed. So I know I've had multiple conversations with parents, students, and teachers about that thing. So I just think we need to be prepared on maybe how to communicate that.
Okay.
Obviously, to educate people on how that really truly works, because that's a little bit different than I think what we had before, which is okay. I mean, change is good, but I
Well,
think we just need to be aware that
Th-
that's coming.
Thank you, Karen. And I made note of that, Karen. I think it's important to note that teachers always have the ability, since grades are their purview, teachers always have the ability to go through the registrar and change grades as appropriate. So that has not changed at all. Okay, that has
So the
not changed.
possibility always
Absolutely.
is there. Okay.
But we're
Okay.
we're just not recommending that to teachers that if they see a student's, in an English language arts class where there are recursive standards, if they see a student performing higher fourth quarter, we would hope they would, right?
Yeah.
Then maybe they did first quarter. They don't necessarily have to go back and change the grade. Now, if that's something they chose to do, that would be up to them, and they could go through the process that we have had in place that hasn't changed to do that. But we're not going to tell teachers that that's something they're required to do. Does that
Got
make
it.
sense, Karen?
Yes, thank you. Did that pick up well on okay. So Rick Anthony, Assistant Superintendent, basically just restated that multiple assessments are encouraged, for students that may be struggling, that during that quarter itself, those assessments, they can go to their teachers and say, hey, I didn't do so well. Can I reassess, this test or this section of a test? Did I miss anything, Rick? Right. So let me restate that too. Teachers will have autonomy and flexibility on how they approach the grades, and the whole structure is meant to be a personalized education with the student, and so hopefully those communication channels can remain open. Okay. I just wanted to make sure our online listeners understood the gist of what's being said.
Thank
So
you for that, Karen. So to that end, our principals have received support and coaching. On the next slide. They've been receiving coaching and support since June to help their teachers implement these changes. A menu of before-school professional development items, including topics related to PBL, are available to all administrators and are specific to elementary and secondary educators. Tomorrow, again, at their annual administrator meeting, principals will receive specific training on how to use the video you watched at the beginning of my presentation this evening, and how to use that as a tool for rolling out these changes and having discussions with their teachers about the changes. Principals are encouraged to give teachers time in their PLCs and or grade level teams to discuss and plan for these changes as part of the time that's been set aside for the video presentation and the presentation on the PBL changes. I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to present to you this evening and share this information with you. If you have any questions, if you're anything like I am, after tonight, you'll have a million questions. Please don't ever hesitate to call or email me. I always enjoy speaking with you.
all right, so the question you have on this little chart that we're obviously going to work on the relationship between Canvas and Gradebook. This is a concern I think all board members have said is, why do we have to log on to two different platforms? Why can't our technology communicate with each other? I mean, I think I see a lot of heads nodding.
Yeah.
So and it says you're studying this ongoing, which is great because I know this isn't something easy to just snap your fingers and make all the way better. When we talk about those two platforms, are you trying to make Canvas communicate, or are we looking at a different platform other than Canvas or Gradebook? Like either variable, right? So are we trying to change the variable, or are we working on the connections between the two? Rick, if you're going to speak, I'd invite you to come to a microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Test. My live? Okay. So we are not looking at a change in Canvas as much, perhaps a change in Gradebook. I don't want to set off any alarms, especially with the place we're in right now and people are really worried about change and that could mean. We are investigating different platform on that side. Obviously, that's a big deal and would be a lot of change. So it's not something that we would slow look to how to do this and what it means, all the etc. So rambling on here, but if we were
Talk for a minute, if you would, Rick, about Canvas as an LMS as opposed to as a grading tool.
Yeah, the challenge with Canvas, in fairness to Gradebook, and the challenge with Canvas, primary market is higher ed. The state has acquired it for all schools. We have free licenses, and it has a lot of utility, and it has a lot of helpful features. It does, fundamental use is for higher ed, meaning it has its interior gradebook, but what it doesn't have is an attendance system. Because in higher ed, you don't really take attendance, say, and you don't really attendance as part of your grading. And so teachers have found utility in some of the features of Canvas as a learning management system and everything that comes with it, including some grading options. The speed grader is a thing that teachers find very useful. The digital automation of how to assess and give quizzes. So that being a higher ed use, there's frustration teacher-wise of some redundancy in the use of our gradebook and our grading system. So we've had trouble reconciling that. That's also magnified a little bit by how Canvas is interpreting proficiency-based grading versus how we are interpreting proficiency-based. So those talks are still happening, and I personally, I know, structure is a business and they're looking at the market and saying, does our market dictate to us on what we need to adjust and change?
Uh,
So you had a question.
I'll make this comment. I've been learning Canvas this summer. And I actually talked to somebody who's going to school back east and said, I like Canvas more. So there are some really good advantages to Canvas. I just am not clear when you say that the standards, like their standards, the way that they do it with Canvas, how you're saying that's not compatible with how we do it? Because can't you adjust the rubric to align with our standards, or are you just saying it switching over to Gradebook is how it's not aligned?
Philosophical approach, there's some misalignment there. The Canvas style has a little bit more of a task completion kind of philosophical approach. It's grading. And then there also is just some compatibility and talking to each other as well. So it's a combination of a couple of different things.
Is that part of that solved by us changing over to recency scoring instead of the decaying average score? Or
I think it's alleviated some, but not solved.
just wondering.
Perhaps in the future, if the board would like, we could delve into it a little bit farther, explaining it a little. Future study session if you'd like.
And Rick, you just touched on something, and board members, I just want to pursue it, but clear the distinction between task completion and proficiency. Those are two very different things.
Yeah.
And the Canvas's utility is not grading. We don't invest in Canvas or pursue Canvas because of its grading utility. We like it because of its communication, the learning management system, and all of those. That's why we're interested in Canvas. And so grading's kind of down the list on their interest as well. And so they threw in a real solid task completion grading system, and it runs automatically. Where we really believe that proficiency is more important than whether or not I've said this for 15 years now, whether or not you brought enough cans of green beans to the food drive. And that's what we're checking is do kids know the stuff, not did they get the worksheet done. And that's just a fundamental.
That's proficiency-based grading, is
Right.
that it's not task-oriented, it is results-oriented.
Exactly.
And that's the problem that we have right now.
And the Canvas grading tool is a task completion tool and not a proficiency-based grading or learning.
In this great nation, is there a system out there that does the best of both? And I kind of say that. So, because, that's the question I get a lot about our technology problems. It's okay, I have to, as a parent, I have to log on to Canvas, and then I have to get confused, and then I have to log over to Gradebook because the Canvas grades really aren't the right grades, but I'm panicked because I'm seeing bad grades. And then I go over here to Gradebook, I have to do a separate login for that. And then I'm over here, and I'm trying to make sense of it. And why do I have to have two, so that's why I'm asking about Canvas and Gradebook. I mean, is there really not one system that can perform everything we want it to do? Like one login, or at the very least, can we have one logon that then click, you can.
There may be a different.
Click. Is
Click.
that an educational term?
Yes. Click here with your mouse.
Yeah, on the LMS side, I think Instructure has quite a bit of market share, and I think they've taken a lot of market share, higher ed especially, throughout the nation. On the K-12 grading side or SIS side, student information system side, there's a variety of different options. So again, we're exploring the Gradebook side to see if there's perhaps something better for a line.
Exploring means have we sent out an RFP?
No, we put a committee together. We started putting a committee together this summer, and we hope to send out an RFP in February, March.
Right. Well, Gradebook is ours, but Canvas is not. And so that is the reason you can't have a dual login, meaning you can't log in once and get to dual programs. I guess a single login, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there is login is
Pull your mic down, Nicole.
oh, sorry. On student portal, isn't there a Canvas button?
Yeah, so we've tried to alleviate that as much as possible in terms of you go to your portal and then every different program you want to sign into, whether it's
So
Go
it's just like
Math, et
Go
cetera,
Math
are
anything
there.
else, you still have to sign in, and
And some of it has to do with product ownership.
Okay. All right. Those are just, I was just relaying some of the questions that I get from parents about those platforms. So,
Yep.
anybody else have a question? 'Cause I have another one.
you have a Nicole?
So when we talked about rewriting the standards, and I think that's was a big thing, and I really appreciate that we're going to do that. It did say on there that we have a curriculum map with the key standards identified by our curriculum specialists. That is curriculum map. Do we have that for every subject?
Yes.
Was my first question.
Yes.
Okay. And then second, who is writing the proficiency scales for that? Are those shared throughout the district, or is everybody writing their own?
So the proficiency levels are how we describe the 1, 2, 3, and 4, and what those mean. The proficiency scales are scales that describe exactly what it means to be proficient, highly proficient, approaching proficient on a specific standard. Those are written by teachers under the guidance of curriculum specialists. And those are written for every standard in every subject, every grade level. There are many, many that are already available to teachers on the intranet that will be moving over to a more easily accessible library of PBL resources. And those new courses coming on, for example, ninth grade courses, though many of those were developed over the summer by teachers and curriculum specialists, but we are continuing to build those as we are continuing to implement PBL in the upper grades.
Okay, so that will be shared.
Yes.
No matter whether you're at Skyline or
Absolutely.
Cypress.
And there are sample on that proficiency scale. There's a link for a sample assessment and an accompanying rubric to go along with that standard so that teachers can either use the assessment that's been created and the rubric that's been created, or they can use it as a starting point for their own work.
So about percentage wise, how many do you think we have already finished?
We are working now, and our priority now is ninth grade, which we worked on over the summer, so that our ninth grade courses were ready for first quarter. All first quarter ninth grade courses have proficiency scales, sample assessments, and rubrics that our teachers worked on over the summer with their specialists.
Super.
And then we had hoped to be able to bring those teachers back together and kind of stay one quarter ahead, so that they would be able to reflect on the experience that they'd had and the work they'd done first quarter, and then build additional assessments for the upcoming quarter. So I'm working closely with high school principals to help that happen.
Wow.
John, let me make sure I understand when we talk about rewriting standards. The standards really are adopted by the State Board of Education. We don't create those standards for all of the courses that we teach. But the plea from folks was that the standards be in language that the kids can actually understand what it is that.
And the parents can understand, right? Yeah.
So rewriting the standards really means rewording the standards.
Rewording or rephrasing,
Very
absolutely,
good. Okay.
yes. So I apologize
No,
for that.
I just want to make sure I was clear.
Absolutely. So that's exactly what that means, rephrasing them in more student and parent-friendly language.
All right. Any other questions, comments, board?
Thank you for your hard work, and thank your committee. Appreciate
Thank you, and I think all the credit goes to all the teachers who put in all the good feedback and all the hard work, and again to our superintendency for really listening to our teachers.
Well, and Don, I can tell you, I've had feedback from a couple teachers, and I think the biggest compliment I can give you is when they tell me, okay, I like Dawn. She gets into it, she gets the feedback, and then she enacts change. And so I think that's the biggest compliment is you're listening, and teachers are thankful for all these changes. These are addressing a lot of the concerns we heard from both teachers and parents. Absolutely. And so thanks for your work.
You.
I would also like to add that I appreciate an administration who would find you and and be willing to change things that need to be changed. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. So
Thank you.
Thanks, you
Thank you,
guys.
Dom.
touch that microphone.
No, no.
All right, we do not have a need for an executive session, and so we will break for our dinner break unless I'm missing something. Am I missing anything? All right, we'll be